The following video contains main story spoilers up to Endwalker patch 6.2. In FF14 lore, the 7th umbral Calamity was marked by the destruction of Dalamud, the releasing of Bahamut, and his reigning chaos on the land. It also marked the rejoining of the 7th reflection by the Scions, which caused many after effects of the Calamity itself. In gameplay, this Calamity was a way for the developers to mark the ending of FF14 1.0 and the beginning of 2.0, A Realm Reborn. A Realm Reborn is set 5 years after the events of the Calamity, enough time to justify the many changes to Eorzea that are shown in gameplay. But few mentions are given to the 5-year gap in time between 1.0 and 2.0. In game today, we see many remnants of the Eorzea that was before the Calamity. Those of us who were on the Carteneau battlefield at the time found themselves transported 5 years into the future, while new adventurers came to Eorzea's shores from beyond. This video will explore the events of those 5 years, giving you a picture of the events that transpired. But first, to properly explain it, we need to also break down the Calamity itself. We begin from the moment Dalamud started its descent. The Allegan satellite Dalamud served as the prison for Bahamut and was used by the Allegan Empire to channel the energy of the solar rays and Elder Primal into the Crystal Tower, providing their civilization with near limitless power. After Alak's fall, Dalamud fell silent and remained in orbit of the planet until the time before the Battle of Carteneau. The Garlean Empire, or more specifically Nael van Darnus, used Allegan technology to divert Dalamud, with the intention of crashing it into the ground as a meteor. The reason for doing this, in their words, was to purge Eorzea of its taint. The moment Dalamud was activated and its orbit changed, an automated Allegan spacecraft in its orbit was alerted. Called Heimdall's Last Sight, this ship detected the change and attempted to subvert this control and restore Dalamud's orbit. The Garleans detected this, however, and turned Dalamud's weapons on the ship, thus disabling it. This ship would crash land on the surface of the moon years later, and can be seen in game today. If you want to learn more about this ship, check out my video on that subject. I left a link in the description. Nothing could stop Dalamud's fall, not even the defeat of Nael by Eorzean adventurers. This is where the Battle of Carteneau came in. It was a battle between Eorzean forces and the Garleans, with the goal of securing the Carteneau plains, so a summoning ritual could be performed to place Dalamud back in orbit. As we know, Bahamut would break free, with such force that scattered the fragments of Dalamud across Eorzea, causing widespread devastation. The biggest tree fragments laid landfall in Lenosia, Thanlan and the Black Shroud. These fragments killed many and caused the survivors to panic. Before these peoples could even process what had happened, Bahamut would then go on a rampage across the skies of the realm, showering the land with his mega flares, causing untold death and suffering. These mega flare impacts caused massive explosions and firestorms, and left many a village in ruins while also damaging the main cities. Evidence of these impacts can be found all over Eorzea today. If you ever noted a glowing impact site on your travels, this was likely one of the mega flare impact sites. Being non-elemental in nature, these cause many random effects when they hit the land, mixing with the etheric elements of that area. Countless lives were lost as a result of Bahamut's rage. When it stopped firing mega flares and returned to the plains, Louisoux and his allies began the ritual. Originally, it was meant to trap and restore Dalamud's orbit, but it would now be used to trap Bahamut and place it in the skies above our star, where Dalamud had been before. They didn't even realise it at the time, but had they been able to trap him and put him in orbit, even temporarily, it would have likely caused the Elder Primal to dissipate. The imprisonment failed. Louisoux, in an act of kindness and hope, cast a powerful spell, sending the adventurers and others on the battlefield below into the ethereal rift, where they would remain until emerging from it 5 years later. For these people, however, the journey may have felt almost instantaneous. This not only included our player character, but many of the adventurers and members of the Circle of Knowing and Path of the 12, the groups that would later come to be known as the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. Louisoux' last act was to transform into the Primal Phoenix, and using the potent aether left in the area, pierce Bahamut's chest, causing him to explode in a rain of destruction that burned the land. It was also in this exact moment that the Scions rejoined the seventh reflection to the source, causing the real effects of the Calamity to happen. Before Louisoux' aether could dissipate, Bahamut reached out and enthralled him. Both of them then sank beneath the earth, where the remains of Dalamud were still active, and still performed their primary duty, to keep Bahamut's primal form intact. And so it was in the 5 years that followed, these binding coils began to rebuild Bahamut's form around his still beating heart, while also keeping Bahamut's worshippers alive, thus preventing the Elder Primal from fading away into the ethereal sea. That is where the cinematic marking the end of 1.0 and the beginning of 2.0 ends. Now we look at the events of the 5 years between the two. In the first hour after Bahamut's destruction, Eorzean Alliance forces struggled to regroup. Some wanted to continue the fight as the Garlean Lion had collapsed. Cooler heads prevailed, however, and word was sent to all forces to withdraw. This had to be done in person, however, as the Link Pearl network was down due to etheric interference in the area. Kane Senna and the twin others went forth to rescue any survivors from the battlefield, both Eorzean and Garlean alike. As for the Garlean forces on the battlefield, most that could flee did so, making their way to Alamigo, where they would be absorbed into the forces of the 14th Imperial Legion, under the command of Gaius van Baelsar. Many officers were executed for their blind devotion to Nail, however, and to secure the 14th's hold over their forces. During their time on the field, a Twin Adder search party seeking survivors found the remains of Tupsamati, the staff of Louisoux. This would later be returned to the Circle of Knowing. As the other forces started pulling back, Admiral Merwe was gravely wounded, and she had to be rushed off the battlefield. Her subordinate, Grand Storm Marshal Slafferzin, took over and led the Maelstrom back to Lenosia. Despite many being on the battlefield or its overlook, they could not figure out what had happened to Bahamut. None could remember seeing Louisoux teleport the adventurers to safety, and it's assumed they all perished in the fires of the battle. This was due to a strange phenomenon that occurred after Bahamut's demise. The memory of all those present and those far away were foggy. They couldn't remember the faces of those who fought on the battlefield. When they tried to remember the heroes who fought in Carteneau, all they could see was a silhouette of light. People would soon call these light-clad heroes of memory the Warriors of Light. This effect would endure well into A Realm Reborn. People's memories only flooded back as the 14th Legion and Ultima Weapon were defeated. As the retreat continued at Carteneau, the realm itself was in a state of chaos. A couple of hours after Bahamut's destruction, the city of ul'dah was in a panic. The Sultana, Nanamo ul Namo, was within the shrine of Asenath Ossuary. She had been one of those that prayed for the summoning of the 12 that happened at Carteneau. The experience had made her pass out, awakening hours later. When she awoke, Pippin was by her side determined to guard her, but he had also passed out from the summoning. Not to mention the structure had become unstable due to damage to the city. As they came to their senses, the sounds of screams filled their ears. The city's people were panicking, as fire and death rained from the sky and the realm was feeling the effects of the rejoining. Riots began to erupt all over, prompting Pippin to lead Nanamo to safety. As they ventured through the streets, Nanamo called for calm and for others to aid her. Pippin stepped forward, as did Papashan of the Sultan Sworn, followed by 5 thaumaturges from their guild. Nanamo set forth to calm her people, flanked on all sides by her guardians, who time would always remember as the Sultana's 7. I highly recommend reading their full story, a link to which I left in the description. An artwork portraying this moment is also available in-game. To the west of the realm, things were also dire. Limsa Lominsa was struck by a tidal wave that resulted from the impact of a larger fragment of Dalamud, which killed many and did great damage to the city proper, and washed over the coastline. This would result in vast changes to the overall coastline of Lenosia. The victims of this tragedy would include many veteran artisans from the blacksmiths and armourers guilds. The effects of this would be felt well into A Realm Reborn, for not enough hands remained to properly rebuild Limsa's fleets. Gridania and the Twelveswood were also feeling the effects of the calamity. Many were killed and injured by the landfall of a large fragment of Dalamud in the area, not to mention the damage Bahamut did to the wood itself. This, combined with the rejoining, greatly destabilised the elementals of the Twelveswood. The effects of this are still being felt today, the woods now more than ever needing the aid of those who call it home to keep it safe. The weakening of the elementals also meant the seals placed on the likes of Amdapor weakened in the 5 years leading to A Realm Reborn, and by the time we started our journey, the seals had all but faded away. In the days and weeks that followed the calamity, the grand companies and city-states worked to save as many as they could and assess the damage caused. Many villages and towns had to be rebuilt, most having been destroyed by Bahamut, including those that contained Eorzea's aetherites. A prime example is Revenant's Toll. Originally, it was a settlement where it stands today, but this was destroyed when a Garlean airship crashed into Lake Silvertear during the Battle of Silvertear Skies. During 1.0, Camp Revenant's Toll will be founded to the west, to aid refugees and adventurers. This camp would later be destroyed by the Calamity, as crystals shot up from the ground and tore it apart. During the 5-year gap, work began on restoring the original Revenant's Toll, which would only be completed towards the end of A Realm Reborn. Meanwhile in Alamigo, Gaius van Baelsar saw an opportunity in the wake of this destruction. He set right to work. His legion would set up many new castrums in the years that would follow. Eorzean forces, severely weakened, could only hold them at bay but couldn't push them back. Thus they had to contend with living with Guardian forces within their borders. Gaius bided his time, as he led the legion from Alamigo. This time to act would be the opening of A Realm Reborn 5 years later, as well as the discovery of the Ultima weapon. Admiral Werwib lay recovering for quite some time due to the injuries endured at Carteneau, and had not been physically or mentally active during her recovery, still coming to terms with what had happened. But after she recovered, she set right to work along with her people. Around 6 months after Carteneau, a meeting was held in ul'dah. 2 groups, the Circle of Knowing and Path of the 12, came together to discuss their future. Both groups were decimated by the calamity. The Path of the 12 was a group dedicated to the study of the Echo and the protection of those who had the gift, all with the goal of using it to protect the realm and its people. This group was led by Minfilia, and Tataru was also a member. The Circle of Knowing was a group set up by Louisoux, consisting of Sharlayan scholars and archons, that came with him from Sharlayan to fight the calamity. It was this group that initiated the ritual summoning of the 12 at Carteneau. It consists of all the Scions we know that hail from Sharlayan, like Y'shtola, Thancred and Papalimo. Both groups agreed to become one, which would mark the birth of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn. The Calamity and all that came with it caused a great number of environmental changes and altered many areas' lands and climates. The Bronze Lake in Limion was once twice as deep as it appears today. With the shaking of the land in the Calamity came the formation of two great fissures, which drained half of Bronze Lake away. This led to the uncovering of the Wanderer's Palace, one of the great temples of the nation of Nim. This would also see the Thornberries that dwelled there freed from their entrapment. Other past ruins would also come to light due to the shifting of the earth, such as the Invisible City in Thanalan, a remnant of the nation of Belladia. One of the most significant was the unearthing of the Crystal Tower in Mordona. This saw the tower awaken once more, and its elegant denizens awoken from their slumber. One of the most severe changes to Eorzea was wrought upon the nation of Ishgard and the highlands that surround it. Before the Calamity, these highlands were lush green areas with much agricultural development. After Calamity struck, this region saw its weather drastically change, and thus began the endless winter of Ishgard. The highlands froze due to the endless cold and snow. Farmland became impossible to work. Rivers froze solid, and its peoples had to migrate to safer locations or take shelter in Ishgard. These 5 years would be extremely harsh on Ishgard due to the weather, which wasn't helped by their war with the Dravanian horde. But life in Eorzea would endure, as it always did in Eorzea. But like most things, it wasn't without sacrifice. In Limion, as the years began to pass, Limsa had to venture further inland to set up agriculture and farms to feed their people. Limsa lost many of its people in the Calamity, and many of its pirates couldn't sail again, thus they took up duties of living and farming the land. However, this development was a direct breach of the treaty with the kobolds of Limion. In this treaty, the land was for the kobolds and for Limsa the sea. But Limsa was desperate and had to breach the treaty, which almost immediately set the two sides at war, which would last long after A Realm Reborn. Limsa itself had to be changed and rebuilt due to the damage caused by Bahamut and the tidal wave, such as the movement of its primary aetheryte into the centre of the city. Gridania also had to be rebuilt in many ways. Minketo's amphitheatre, which had long been a gathering place for celebration in Gridania, was destroyed during the Calamity. The Carpenters Guild found itself with endless work during this time, but knew the importance of the amphitheatre, and moved what they could from the old site where it once stood, to rebuild it at the centre of the city where it stands today. Gridania would ever work hard to calm the elementals during this time. It was also the case that these elementals would deny entry to Alamegan refugees, which would cause a great deal of tension. Gridania lost many of its traders and artisans, with many more quitting professions entirely. It wouldn't be until years later, with the arrival of merchants from ul'dah, that Gridania's markets once again began to prosper, with the chime of guild coins once again becoming a happy sound near its stalls. Ul'dah would have a humanitarian crisis on its hands with refugees from Alamigo and the Calamity to care for. The city itself also needed extensive rebuilding that proceeds to this very day. Milvanet's Sacrarium is a temple of worship for Nald, just like Azanet Ossuary is for Thal. This temple was the same one Thancred was praying at during the summoning of the 12. Currently it's still closed today due to being damaged by the Calamity. Eorzea focused on rebuilding and putting life back on track for the rest of this time, with the Scions standing watch over the realm to keep any primal influences in check. Rebuilding would proceed all over, with new camps and towns replacing those that were lost. Many of these places would come to serve as locations for new aetherytes. Funnily enough, these aetherytes were paid for by the monetarists of ul'dah, thus the reason we had to pay a guild toll to use them was repayment of this service. Everything would begin to change, and not for the better, due to the influences of the shadows. But the light would emerge soon to combat it, in the adventurer that would come to be known as the Warrior of Light. Thanks for watching, everyone. The 5-year gap has been a fascination of mine for a long time, so I'm glad I finally got to cover it. If you enjoyed the video, leave your opinion on it and this subject in the comments, and mega flare that like button to show your support of the video. Thanks all, and now, as always, have a good one.